Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're pleased to welcome Anders Vistisen, the youngest member of the European Parliament, representing the Danish People's Party, part of Denmark's rapidly growing Eurosceptic movement. We caught up with Anders on Radio Row at CPAC, where he was studying the colorful world of U.S. conservatives. Anders, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Anders, at 26 years old, you began your term the youngest of all 751 members of the European Parliament. How did you pull that off?
You know, when you get elected, it's the voters who decide if you're young or old. But it helps that in Denmark, in all European elections, it's a proportionate system. So if you have a party that is on the rise, or you run for a party on the rise, it's easier to get in as a new face. And our party have been very successful, going from 1 to 4 MEPs in the European Parliament. So there was a bit of room for me, but of course it was a hard campaign, and we were very happy to get the personal votes needed to get in.
Tell us a little about your campaign, because we here in the U.S. are not familiar with what it's like over there in Denmark.
Yeah, I was chairman of the youth wing at the time, so I had a lot of young support for my campaign, quite also geographical support due to the fact that I was a member of local city council and the region council where I came from. So I sort of had my base there, and luckily it was enough to beat the other candidates on the list, and I got in on my personal votes.
Did you use a lot of social media? What was the campaign? Television or no?
No, actually it's illegal in Denmark to do television ad for politicians.
Really?
Yeah, so you cannot do that. Of course you can make YouTube videos and so, but
no broadcast.
No broadcast. So we did much of the social media, but also a lot of town hall, door-to-door campaigning, sort of the very basics that I think all campaigns have to do.
Real old school kind of campaigning.
So it was sort of a mixed batch.
Tell us about the Danish People's Party. It's relatively new among the European conservatives and reformists.
Yeah, it's a relatively new party. It's only 20 years old. We sort of took over where we believed that the other right-wing parties in Denmark had failed on the conservative agenda. We actually have a conservative party in Denmark that is so unconservative that it's almost eradicated now. So we are the leading party, especially on social conservatism.
And what are the key tenets of the party?
We were based on sort of a Eurosceptic basis, also more regulated migration, so we don't have this, what we see now, chaotic situation. We'll get to that, but that's a very important step for our party. But also law and order, justice, family values.
What about economic policies?
We have been doing very much to balance the Danish budget, to pay off the debt. Actually, we have succeeded in these 20 years of gone since then to have one of the biggest debts of an EU country to pay it all off during the early years of this millennium. So that was quite successful when we had the last centre-right government.
I understand personal debt in Denmark is among the highest in the world. What does that say about the Danish people?
I think it has something to do with our subprime system that is quite safe. So many own their own property with quite a big subprime debt. So I think it's difference in capitalization of property that makes it so significantly stand out from the rest of Europe. So
people can basically turn their houses into piggy banks.
Not the same as in the US. You have a quite regulated system, so it's quite difficult to do something, and you cannot over-debt your housing. There's quite a lot of regulation, but it stands out.
Let's look at wider EU policy, and let me ask an economic question. Who bears greater responsibility for the lack of economic growth across the EU? The regulators or the central banks and monetary authorities?
I think they have an equal blame on this. The problem is, when you have a corporation like the European Union, you make rules, you make common rules. We would do the same if we had to
I understand there's like 5,000 pages of rules on cabbages.
Yeah. But the problem is that when the big guys don't want to follow the rules, they don't. So the first country not to follow the Eurozone rules was Germany. And if Germany don't follow the rules, you cannot enforce them on the small guys.
Well, how so? Give an example.
We had rules saying how much public debt you could have. You could make 1 year.
Yeah, that's right.
You had a cap on how much debt per capita or per BNP you could have, and so on. And Germany started not following the rules. Not very significantly, but you could have 3%. They started to have 4%, have 5%. You could have 60% of DDI in debt. They started sort of to go over that, and not much because Germany is still a relatively good economy. But when you don't enforce the rules on Germany, how could you do it on Greece, on Italy,
on France? Good luck.
And therefore, when you send that signal, everyone breaks the rules. It's like a speeding limit. If you don't enforce it, everyone will go fast on the highway.
So I'm quite familiar with entrepreneurship in Sweden, having worked for a Swedish company for a while, and particularly in the software areas. They're actually renowned. What's the status of entrepreneurship in Denmark?
we are very good at creating new businesses. What our major problem is to grow small businesses into medium-sized businesses and big business.
They had a wall.
They had a wall. Actually, they always stipulated that Denmark should be the best place to start a business, but it's a very, very bad place to grow a business.
So it's all mom and pop, little family operation.
Yeah. 1-2-man operations, consultancies, especially a lot of service providers.
Is this because of employment law or tax law?
It is bureaucracy, primarily, I think. If I have a one-person business and I want to have one employee, all sort of national and EU regulations kick in. I actually run the youth wing, as I said, and we had just one student employee. It took me more time as chairman of the organization to do her payment and insurance and all the stuff following than her actual working hours of 8 hours a week. So it was, yes, you have to have mandatory employee conversations 2 times a year, even though it's a 2-man operation. You have to have a safety committee consisting of employers and employees, even though it's a 2, 3, 4-man operation.
Well, why do people put up with this?
It's Europe. Everything's regulated.
It has a consequence. Youth unemployment in the European Union varies from a low of 7% in Germany to 50% in countries like Greece and Spain. I think the average is about 22% across the EU as a whole. How did your generation end up becoming the lost generation?
I think, when the economy in general is bad, it hits the youngest generation hardest. If you make a great debt, you give it to your children. If you run a bad economy, the one that suffers the most is the one getting out to the employment market. If you have a good job, you'll probably keep
it. You're protected, yeah.
Yeah. So I actually think there is a youth unemployment issue. But to solve it, you need to fix the economy. So instead of, in Europe, we are very good at sort of making all these nanny programs, making sort of a specific targeted thing and pick the winner, all these kind of things. But instead of that, we should focus on repairing the fundamental economy. And then we'll be able to get more people out in jobs, create new jobs. Otherwise, you'll not have more young people having a job.
Well, this is the rising tide theory, but there's also a very big social safety net. I mean, I was told that Denmark's probably the best place in the world to be unemployed.
We're also one of the most heavily taxed places in the world, so that goes together,
Right. Why work?
Yeah. Actually, the problem of sort of people living off benefits are not in particular a youth problem in Denmark. It's more a social problem. You inherit a poor work ethic. We can see that in statistics.
Yeah.
It's also, to some extent, a migration problem. We have specific groups of migrants having a very hard time getting into the workforce.
Economy.
Yeah. So I don't think it's in particular a work problem. What we do that is a problem for unemployment is that sometimes the education we provide to our young people is just educating them to unemployment. We have way too many in social studies, social science.
Well, we have that problem here too.
And it's not really qualified. We cannot have everyone doing thesis on each other. And we actually see in our economy that we have bottlenecks in craft skills, carpenters, blacksmiths, so
plumbers,
on.
They do pretty well.
Yeah. And at the same time, we have academics that we can feed pigs with them.
Unemployed PhDs.
Yeah. And it's a great problem, especially because, we have been focusing way too much on just getting people through some sort of college, not focusing on what we need in the other end.
Right. There's a lot of people who are concerned about that trend. Great Britain is in the midst of a referendum that will decide whether their country stays in the European Union or comes out. Any guess on how that might resolve itself?
I think it's going to be a very tight election on Brexit. I will say I hope for the best but feel the worst.
Well, what is the best and what is the worst?
It depends if you're British or Danish. But if you are Danish, you would very much like to have the UK in the European Union. UK have been a common sense voice in the European Union, talking for less union, more place for the national states, less regulation from Brussels, more free market, not protectionism like France and Italy and Spain.
Sure.
So
if you lose that voice, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a big country, and we need them to counterbalance Merkel in Germany, Hollande in France. But I do understand Brits who want to leave the European Union.
Will they be better off if they leave?
It's a hard question. We've never tried it before, so it's sort of an experiment. But I think that there will not be a catastrophe for Britain if they leave, but there might be some ramifications.
What do you make of the Greek bailout? Is there any hope of economic recovery in Greece while they remain lashed to the euro?
No.
That was a simple answer.
It's like handcuffs. They are handcuffed themselves to so much debt within the euro that they cannot really get out of it.
Yeah.
They cannot get ahead. So it's sort of just a snowball going down the hill because, we have impose physical discipline on a country that's not used to physical discipline,
Sure.
and the debt is just rising towards Germany. Then we give them money to pay off the debts. We are lending them money just to
Come right
pay
back.
interest rates
Yeah.
on their old debt.
Well,
and
that's extended
you're not
pretend.
going to reconstruct the country that way. It will take decades to have Greece run again, but it will take even longer if we keep binding them to this Eurozone. It's not going to work for Greece.
So, Anders, Europe is facing a tremendous immigration crisis with both political and economic refugees washing in from Muslim lands, ranging from North Africa to Afghanistan. A sense of panic seems to be setting in as one country after another slowly closes its borders, with migrants banking up into their entry point in Greece. Economics aside, and we'll get back to that, how concerned are you about public safety, given the increased violence reported by the press, particularly violence by young male refugees?
It is a security concern for Europe. We know that one of the attackers of Paris from the horrible attack came from Syria with the refugee streams. We know that there has been an enormous increase in violence, violent crimes, murder, rapes, all kind of things from these migrant populations. So it is a very big concern. In my little country, Denmark, 5 million inhabitants, maybe roughly the size of Maryland, we know that the police estimate that more than 100,000 illegal migrants have crossed the border, and we have no way of knowing who they are, where they went. We hope most of them went to Sweden, but we don't know.
You don't know for
and you
sure.
know, if you have 100,000 going through, you don't take a handful to make a terrorist cell. It only takes a few to make a crazy attack like the one we've seen in California here. And
there's also
Paris.
everyday crime. It's not just that kind of a jihadist crime.
No, you also have sort of the influx of violent crime. We see that actually Malmö in Sweden, the second largest city there, has the highest murder rate in the Western Hemisphere, even higher than you can find anywhere in the United States.
I didn't know that.
No, and
worse than Detroit, worse than Camden,
Chicago,
worse than Chicago.
Where you find they have more murders per capita than anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere.
Well, the Danes are very law-abiding citizens, right? These are the people who won't cross where the light is red, there's no cars, they won't cross the street.
No.
How do you get immigrants to assimilate into that kind of law-abiding culture?
It actually depends very much on the culture you come with. We don't have any real problem with crimes from Asian communities in Denmark, from Western communities, Australians, Americans, South Americans coming. It's a very specific problem concentrated around the Middle East, some North African countries, Afghanistan. We have seen in old statistics they're very, very hard to assimilate into Danish society, unfortunately.
Does Denmark have any no-go zones similar to the French Benelux where the police pretty much don't go?
We have zones where the police cannot come without severe backup. We talk multiple.
Severe backup?
Yeah. Even firefighters and ambulances will not go into this area without police escorts.
Sounds like the Bronx when I was a kid.
I wasn't there, but I guess it's pretty much the same thing. You know, we have ghetto areas where it's not safe for public servants to go unless they're heavily protected by firearms.
Wow.
It's a very, very bad situation, especially if people in there is in need, if there is a fire or someone needing an ambulance.
Are you concerned that vigilantes might begin administering rough justice if authorities don't get the situation under control?
Yeah, it is a concern that if, society have to provide you safety. And if it doesn't do that, people will act at some point. I don't think we're there in Denmark yet, but we see in Sweden that have had
gangs.
We see gangs. We see street thugs taking the street, white supremacists doing this kind of thing. And that's not the solution to any problem, but it is a cry from frustration from a population where you don't deal with these issues.
And the Danes are an unarmed populace, right? You don't have guns the way we have in the U.S.?
No, it's quite hard to. I have a hunter's license, so I can carry a shotgun, but, it's not very handy to deal with that kind of situation.
Well, what about the economic side? Denmark recently passed a law that says immigrants must surrender their valuables if they expect to collect public assistance. What's that all about?
Actually, the same rule is applying to Danish citizens. You cannot get a dime from the state before you spend your own money.
Really?
Yeah.
And they do audits? They'll check your accounts?
Yeah. When you go down, they say, I want unemployment benefits. We say, okay, have you sold your car off? Do you have an expensive household? Then you have to sell it. If you have a new big flat screen TV, you can sell that and get an old one that is cheaper and so on. We are just trying to make an equal standing here because it is a welfare state and very expensive. But it is very hard for us to keep finance this migrant flows. Last year alone, if we sort of compare to the US and scaled up again, the US should spend just last year alone more than $100 billion more on migrants in the US that single year, just to have sort of the equivalent of what we spent on the migrants coming that year alone. Then we don't take into account all the money we spend of the migrants have been coming for the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Well, what is it about Danish law that obliges you to provide welfare to non-citizens?
Some EU laws require it. Also, the European Human Rights Convention require us to do it. So it's very hard to tighten these laws more than we've already done. We've actually tried sort of to sort this out, but due to all these conventions we have signed for some stupid reasons, we cannot really do much else. That's why this proposal came up. That's one of the things you could actually do. You could demand people spending their own money before they got welfare from the state.
So when immigrants arrive with their family jewels or gold coins, sewn into their dress, are you really starting to take it away?
No, we've said that all things of affectionate value you don't take. So if you have a personal cell phone, I don't take that. If you have your wedding ring, I don't take that. If you have a family heirloom, your grandmother's old jewelry, will not take that. This is if you come with big amount of cash. If you come with 10 iPhones, I might take the 9 and let you keep your personal ones. And we're not taking it. It's confiscated, and then the valuables that is not spent to pay for your medical services, your housing needs, your food needs, whatever you take from the Danish state, you will have refunded. So it's not like we just take.
You actually keep an account.
We keep an account, and
Good Lord, that sounds complicated.
Yeah, it is a very complicated system, but it's the same system we have in place for Danish and welfare. So you can say.
So the system's already set up.
It's not an add-on system. It's just including these people in an already existing system in Denmark.
I understand Denmark's been publishing ads in Lebanese newspapers warning potential immigrants that welfare benefits for arriving immigrants have been sharply cut. Has that slowed the flow?
We can see that Denmark is taking a less percentage of the migrants overall, but because the number have sort of skyrocketed, even though we take a less percentage, it's still a lot of more people. But it is a problem. People believe actually that they can come to Denmark and from day one have a free car at their disposal, a house for their family and so on. That's the belief they're coming with. Actually, we have people coming now.
Asking for it.
In our refugee camp saying, okay, let me just go back because this was not the free ride we were hoping for. And we said, we thought you were refugees. We thought you wanted protection. No, we just wanted to have this great life without paying anything. So we just withdraw our application to be refugees in Denmark and go home. It's nicer there.
No.
Yes, there's example of that in Denmark, in Germany, in Sweden.
So this is an advertising problem.
I think so. If I was fleeing from Nazi Germany and I found out that going to the US, coming to Brooklyn, that I didn't get my car, I didn't get my house,
that would still be fine.
I think I would not go back to Nazi Germany for that reason. And then I think if you're a real refugee, of course you'll settle for having a roof over your head, plenty of food, free education.
Is there an informal economy, the underground economy in Denmark, where they work off the books?
Not so much in Denmark. You have a quite regulated system.
Because that's how it works here in the U.S.
Yeah, I know. But I think in Germany you'll see more and more of that. Especially now, you have this very stupid idea to make quotas to distribute these migrants throughout the European countries. Eastern Europe will not take any for good reasons.
Sure.
And they have said more or less, we will take our quota, but we will not control if they are here in Germany. So you'll see all the quota refugees sent to Eastern Europe. All of them will be sort of an underground black economy in places like Germany, Holland, Belgium, where they can go in and sort of live under a radar.
So if you follow the news, one by one, countries seem to be, if not closing their borders, at least vastly controlling the flows. There's a tremendous backup that's taken place. What they call the Balkan routes being shut down. Macedonia is a mess right now. All of this backs up into Greece. How do they fix that?
I think we have to take the economy out of this equation. I think we need to take the rural refugees, not the economical free riders that want to sort of use the situation. Even the European Commission states that 2/3 of the people coming to Europe is not refugees. They are economical migrants. So that's sort of the start to fix the problem. But, to really even begin doing anything, we need to have secure borders. And in Europe, we did... I don't know if you did the same thing here, but you always had the common borders on the external side.
Right.
But we never protected the external borders when we tore apart the internal borders. So, the idea was that I should not have a border to Germany anymore because there was some outside border who made that unnecessary. We just never created the outside borders. So there have never been an efficient external border control in Europe. And that's why we see it so easy for illegal migrants to cross over.
So we try to make sense out of what we see over there. Denmark has been one of the countries that many have held up as an example. U.S. presidential candidate Bernie Sanders has called Denmark a socialist paradise. Is he right?
To some extent, it is. It is what we call a welfare state in Europe, and the Scandinavian countries are known to be the most extreme welfare state nations in Europe. But I think you have to take into account the very huge cultural differences there are between a country like the U.S. and a small, very homogeneous society as the Danish, Norwegian, or Swedish societies.
So, for example, why wouldn't that system work here?
First of all, it will demand a huge amount of redistribution of wealth and tax levels that will be totally unprecedented in the American system. The personal tax in Denmark for high incomes would be above 50%. Car taxes is 150%.
150%?
Yes, on every car you buy. And it's actually coming down. It was 180% before that for many, many years. The VAT is 25%. You'll have to have such a redistribution of wealth to have such a society that it's not very feasible to do any place in the world. I could not recommend anyone to do it. It's very hard to dismount again.
But that's pretty much Bernie's campaign.
I could imagine, but if that's what America wants, they can vote for Bernie Sanders. But I don't think that most Americans realize what kind of change to society it will be to go from the American system to a Scandinavian welfare model.
So, Anders, as a young man starting off your political career as a member of the European Parliament, with some skepticism, what do you see ahead?
I see that the European Union either have to go back to basics, to be a free market zone, concentrate on trade, concentrate on what we do best commonly, or it will crash and burn. All the great accomplishments of Europe, the Eurozone, the Schengen cooperation, the Eastern expansion, all of those are in tremendous crisis, and all of them are somehow or another sort of making this European project, it's an Achilles heel for it. So either you have to go back to basics, do what Europe was good at, trade, or you will see that the European Union will not exist in the form we know it in 10 or 20 years.
So, Anders, wrapping things up, we're in the midst of a bizarre election year. No one knows exactly what to expect in the fall. As a young foreigner looking around at the American political system, what do you see?
I see a lot of anger in the American people on both sides. I see candidates that a couple of years ago I don't think anyone would have expected getting any traction at all in a presidential election. And I think that the political establishment have to take that seriously, otherwise they'll lose control over the situation. Maybe they already to some extent have lost some control over the situation. Personally, America is a very important ally to any Western country. We are looking for American leadership, and we are looking for a president that can fix the relationship, especially to the old Europe. So that's what I personally hope for in the new president. But it's very exciting to see where it will go.
Well, Anders, thanks so much for sharing your perspective with us. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you.
That was Danish member of the European Parliament, Anders Vistisen, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. You can check out Real Clear Radio Hour on iTunes or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. And while you're at it, take a look at realclearmarkets.com, my go-to place for diverse views on political economics. Today's program was partially underwritten by the generous support of Old Boston Restorations, a Victorian property management company in Boston's South End. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station, when we take an inside look at entrepreneurship on two continents. See you then.